I cannot be silent.
Back when Eisenhower was the president, golf courses is where most of his time was spent. So I never really listened to what the president said, because in general I believed that the general was politically dead. But he always seemed to know when the muscles were about to be flexed, because I remember him saying something, mumbling something about a military-industrial complex.
As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our home nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problem, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent.
Each one reach one, each one time.
I cannot be silent.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone's got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit say work.
I cannot be silent.
Empowering the body, mind, and spirit. This is We Cannot Be Silent with Phil Restino and Larry Pinkney.
Tonight is the April 21st, 2014 broadcast of We Cannot Be Silent with Phil Restino and Larry Pinkney. And some of you have heard us before. We've been on the air, we're in our third year already. I'm going to read the notice that went out this evening to announce the show. And this month's episode, we're giving it the title, Remembering Obama's Libyan War Crime. And this is a big part of why we sought out the Moriartys, because, as you'll find out, they were there, eyewitness to the whole thing. Our featured guests this month will be James and JoAnne Moriarty of LibyanWarTheTruth.com. LibyanWarTheTruth.com. And they are Americans who were doing business in Libya between 2007 and 2011, and were on-the-ground eyewitnesses to the U.S./NATO destabilization of Libya, eventually leading to the overthrow and murder of its leader, Gaddafi, and the ongoing chaos that Libya has been experiencing ever since. March 19th marked the 11th year anniversary of the white Republican war criminal President George Bush's outrageous, illegal, shock and awe attack on Iraq, as well as the third anniversary of the black Democrat war criminal President Barack Obama's equally outrageous and equally illegal shock and awe attack on the African nation of Libya. Much has been made by the anti-war left this past month to remember the 11-year anniversary of the Republican Junior Bush's impeachable war crime on Iraq, but little, if any, mention was made by them in regards to the 3-year anniversary of the Democrat Obama's still impeachable war crime on Libya. Also, little, if any, has been said by the national leadership of the anti-war left in regards to the readily informed delegates representing the rank-and-file membership of Veterans for Peace, just 4 to 5 months after Obama's shock and awe attack on Libya. And they passed a resolution at the August 2011 National Convention, which directed the Congress of the United States to immediately begin impeachment proceedings against the sitting Democrat President Obama for war crimes, to include his outrageous military attack on Libya. And that was done by the national membership of Veterans for Peace. Although the resolution for impeaching Obama for war crimes did not receive much backing when it was first introduced at VFP's National Convention in August of 2009, the 2010 public endorsements of anti-war activist and Gold Star mother Cindy Sheehan, human rights activist and international law professor Francis Boyle, and Native American anti-war and social justice activist John Splitting the Sky Boncore brought more support for it at VFP's National Convention in August 2010, where it still did not get enough votes to pass. However, with Obama's shock and awe attack on Libya of 19 March 2011 came the public endorsement of the very same day by the Honorable Cynthia McKinney, and in July 2011, following his article in the Black Commentator entitled, "Is It Time to Impeach Barack Obama?" columnist and former Black Panther Party member, our own Larry Pinkney, publicly endorsed our resolution calling for impeachment of Obama for war crimes. Telephone calls were made by Kathy Bracewell and volunteers from the East Central Florida chapter of Code Pink, Women for Peace, throughout the month of July 2011 to well over 200 Veterans for Peace chapter contacts. The telephone calls were to make sure that their respective chapter memberships and delegates to the National Convention being held in Portland, Oregon the following month were properly informed and briefed regarding the case for impeachment and its growing support before they were to place their respective votes on the impeachment resolution at the VFP's annual convention. As was already mentioned, on its third year in a row of being presented for vote, the national membership of Veterans for Peace, by a majority vote on 6 August 2011, passed VFP Resolution 2011-7, calling for the Congress of the United States to immediately begin impeachment proceedings against Democrat President Barack Obama for war crimes. Perhaps after hearing the first-hand eyewitness accounts of Democrat President Obama's Libyan war crime from our guests tonight, James and JoAnne Moriarty, more Americans of conscience, will contact their local chapter of Veterans for Peace, as well as their respective members of Congress and their fellows in their respective local communities, and push them to bring forward and act on Veterans for Peace's Resolution 2011-7, calling on Congress to immediately begin impeachment proceedings against the Democrat President Barack Obama for war crimes. We sincerely hope so. And for more on the resolution to impeach Obama for these war crimes, to include the Libya shock and awe that our guests, the Moriartys, were on the ground witness to, please search out the article Timeline to Veterans for Peace's Vote to Impeach Obama 2009 through 2013. And for further information about tonight's guests, James and JoAnne Moriarty, please go to their website at www.libyanwarthetruth.com. And I did want to give that background, James and JoAnne, just to so you all know where we're coming from as far as us inviting you on tonight, as well as the listeners. And now, we went to your website, and we wanted to find out, a little bit more that we could tell our listeners about you. And we did go to the part of the website, Who Are James and JoAnne Moriarty, Our Story. And there's quite a bit in there. I'm just going to read the first paragraph just to give them a taste. And then, when we get you to tell your story, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more to tell. The Moriartys were business people doing business in Libya since 2007, January. They made a unique enzyme that rejuvenates oil wells and cleans up sludge pits, cleans out pipelines and tanks, and does a whole lot of other things to oil. They booked a huge amount of business in Libya from 2007 to 2011, $5 billion worth of product. Man, that's a lot of product. They signed a joint venture with the Social Security Investment Fund of Janzawer near Tripoli, Libya. They actively began to build a production facility to fulfill these contracts for their product when the so-called Libyan revolution began in February of 2011. And it all went to hell since then. Well, thank you for indulging me there, Larry and James and the listeners and JoAnne. At this point in time, we would like to introduce Larry, who did have time today to watch the videos of some of your talks. And why don't Larry say hello, and maybe you could bring our guests on air, Larry, if you would.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. I want to thank first and foremost, as always, our listeners to the show. We appreciate you. We need you. We need each other. I also want to thank most strongly Dave Corso, who is an incredible, put it mildly, hard-working. I would say engineer, but he's so much more than an engineer. Thanks to Dave Corso, there is wolfspiritradio.com. So thank you, Dave. Thank you for your tremendous work, and you've been doing it for so long, for so many shows. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to move as quickly as possible, Phil, so let me say that I'm appreciative for having our guests, James and JoAnne Moriarty, on the show. We hope that we can get a great deal of information out to our listeners, and also resources, places that our listeners can go to substantiate some of the things, if not all of the things, that our guests will be saying. So with that, and no further ado, I'm just going to stop, and I'm going to actually turn it back to you, Phil, so that you can do the introduction and we can move right into the show.
Sure thing. Thanks, Larry. And for those who are wondering, Larry and I did come to meet in the summer of 2011 around this issue of our Veterans for Peace pursuing the impeachment remedy for our war criminal president and to stop the bombing of countries like Libya. And it was a fellow veteran for peace, Larry, who I do want to mention and give credit to, who also writes columns for the publication that you're involved with. That's the intrepidreport.com. A Vietnam vet, Nick Egnitz, and Nick is up there in Indiana, and he wrote an article on the Libyan rebels dance in the streets while globalized capital waits in the wings, and that's from August of 2011. Libyan rebels dance in the streets while globalized capital waits in the wings. And it was from one of these email blasts, Larry, that we put out today, or I put out today, announcing the show, that Nick had received. And it does pay off to send these blasts out, no matter how much negative response you get. I got this response from Nick then when we were putting out that call for impeachment. He said, you know, Phil, there's this guy, Larry Pinkney, he wrote an article about impeaching Obama, and get this, this guy's a former, he's a former Black Panther Party veteran and all kinds of stuff. It's hard to get more black than this. So, this guy is not tainted by color, and he's not playing sides. He's a straight shooter, and he's calling for impeaching Obama. You might want to look him up. And so that's how Larry and I came to meet. Is I did look him up, and I want to send out a special thanks to Vietnam vet and veteran for peace, Nick Egnatz, up there in Indiana. Thank you, Nick, if you're listening. And please, folks, go to intrepidreport.com and look for Nick's writings. Its last name is spelled Egnatz. And with that, we're going to finally move into tonight's show and introduce to you folks our guests, who, as I mentioned earlier, were there on the ground, American business folks doing business in Libya before the U.S. and NATO decided to just tear it up. And with that, I want to bring on air for y'all James and JoAnne Moriarty of please, where is it? Of LibyanWarTheTruth.com. James and JoAnne, are you with us?
We're here.
Yes, we are.
We're
Thank
so
you,
proud
Bill.
to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience in listening to all, letting me spit all that out before bringing you on. We would like you to maybe give us a little bit of your background, how you ended up in Libya. You mentioned your business folks, and it sounds like you were quite involved over there in the oil industry, and just give us a little background and bring us up to the attack on Libya, if you would.
First of all, Phil, I'd like to thank you so much. You've been a supporter of ours for a short while, but you've been moving mountains for us. We really thank you for that. And David Corso, we appreciate you setting up the difficult links we had with our communication tonight. And Larry Pinkney, we're so proud to be on the show with you. Your brother was one of the first radio hosts that saw forward enough to have us on his show several times, and God bless him. And we want to thank all the support we've gotten from that. I'll tell you all first, we're business people. We're not activists. And fortunately enough, we have a proprietary product that does all kinds of neat things to oil. We do a medical-grade DNA manipulation of microbes. We make an enzyme, and then we kill all the living portion off, and we rejuvenate oil wells that have stopped producing oil. We clean up pipelines and sludge pits. We can take all the organic fluid out of fracking fluid. We clean up pipelines, chicken fat, PCBs. It's a great product. We've had tremendous success with it for 15 years. And we have rejuvenated oil wells that people said couldn't work, and we've had great success. We looked at Libya as a new market because they had been locked out of any new technologies for 38 years. And we were the first non-government sponsored company to go into Libya, and we arrived there 1st of January 2007. That was after the treaty, which was signed in 2006. And for your listeners' information, Gaddafi had to step down as a part of that treaty. Libya had to reduce its military by 50%. It had to get rid of all of its offensive weapons and get rid of all its nuclear capabilities, and they did that. But even at that, when we arrived in Libya, we didn't have any idea of what to expect because we'd heard all these things about Libya, and I've got to tell you all, none of them were true. We had 4 security guards that we had hired to travel with us. JoAnne had a bushel basket full of scarves. She didn't need any of those, and after 2 days I sent the security home because we were safer walking by ourselves in the streets of Tripoli than in any city in the United States. And we planned to be there 5 days. We had business in Egypt and a big contract in Kuwait with one of the princes there. And the Libyan government asked us to stay over for another week or two because they wanted to find out about business outside of Libya. And every night we met a different minister, and they were like sponges soaking up information. And in the end, we signed a contract to rejuvenate 2,500 oil wells. And they're monster wells. They're 1,200-foot thick production zones. That amounted to about $600 million to $1 billion worth of our products. So we were proactive to go do whatever was necessary to fulfill those contracts in Libya. But I want JoAnne to tell you all what Libya was like. Unlike what you had heard, Libya was a progressive country, very modern, and
Libya was. You have to understand that before the bloodless coup in 1979, when Gaddafi took charge, or they appointed him to take charge, Libya was really the poorest country in Africa, having been occupied its entire history by Phoenicians and Greeks and Romans and whomever, and still was being occupied by Italy. Now, the Libyans were basically the slaves. Libyans were not allowed to own any land. They just worked on the land, and the average salary was 60 dinar a year. That's $50 a year. When they had their bloodless coup, when the tribes got together and were going to throw the king out, the king just ran off. He was a despot. He was a pedophile. He was a bad guy. So he just ran off. There was no blood spilled at all, and they appointed Gaddafi to lead because he was the most charismatic and highly educated and some other things. So they put him in charge. He immediately gave the land to the Libyan people who'd been working it. The first time in their history they owned their own land. So as a leader, they loved him. He was completely against radical Islam, and people don't know this because the U.S. has slandered him to a point where I don't know if you could ever clean him up. But he would not even allow any kind of radical Islam. If you had a beard, you weren't even allowed to work in the government. And I think it was in 1997 when they said that 1,200 people were killed in a prison in Libya. They accused Gaddafi of this. Those people were radical Islamists that had gone door to door in Benghazi and chopped people's heads off. And those are the people that disappeared, which, to my mind, was a good thing for the world.
He just didn't make enough of them disappear.
Yeah. So, also, I found out immediately when we got there, that the women in Libya had been emancipated by Gaddafi in the 1970s. They were not required to wear any kind of special clothing. They were doctors and lawyers, and they were part of the military. They were any kind of profession they wanted to be in. They were in the government. They were completely free, just like we are here in the United States, to do what they wanted to do with their lives. And
in the 17 times we were in Libya for business, we never saw one shop that sold beekeepers' outfits. Not one.
Libyans are against radical Islam. In general, I would say 98% of them are. The 2 or 3% that are radicals is who NATO joined hands with, because they were living in exile out of Libya. But yet, going back to what Gaddafi did for the country, what his plan was, his green book or whatever you want to talk about, they had free education, completely free, and as high as your brain would take you, if it wasn't in Libya, you could go outside and have it completely paid for with a stipend. They had free medical. Medical was paid to whatever you needed, and if you couldn't get it there, it was paid anywhere in the world you needed to go, with one of your family could go with you.
They paid your travel expenses as well as your medical. For university studies, you were paid a stipend to live on while you were studying. Not only your books, fees, tuition, but we knew a young man getting his PhD in England. He had a wife and 4 kids. His monthly stipend while he was in school was £4,950. That's about $7,500.
Yeah, fuel was 44 cents a gallon. All your utilities were paid in the house. When you got married the first time, or when you got married, you received a $46,000 gift from the government to start your life. Whenever a new baby was born, the couple received a $5,000 gift. Your house, they were building 600,000 plus condominiums in Libya, and you could get one of those condominiums as a new couple or as a person, and it cost you 10% of your salary for 20 years, and then it belonged to you. Libya was using most of its oil money. 49% of it went to the government, and the rest went to supporting the people in the country. Out of the 5.5 million Libyans, they all had a good life.
For example, 44 cents a gallon gasoline cost the government of Libya $800 million a year in supplement. The 640,000 condominiums were 2,000 to 2,700 square foot in size. And they were all wet wall construction. They were great buildings, you know. And the thing that we saw in Libya is the people were happy. They had the highest income in Africa. Average salary in Libya was $15,800 a year. That was higher than China, higher than India. If you graduated from college and you couldn't get a job, then the government paid you $15,200 a year until you could find a job. Nobody in Libya had any debt. And if someone was a poor businessman and didn't have enough money to feed his family, they had storehouses all over the country. You could go to one of those storehouses without an ID or anything and say, I need food, and they would give you 50 kilos of rice, 50 kilos of flour, 20 kilos of milk, 20 kilos of cheese, a lot of other things, and enough money to have an animal slaughtered for your family. And if you needed to go back 2 days later, you go back again. No questions asked. Every Ramadan season, which is like their Christmas season, every man, woman, and child could go into any bank in Libya, and the government would give them a gift of 500 dinar, which was about $430 or $40. So there was no reason for the Libyans to have an uprising. The radical Islamists did not like Gaddafi because he would not allow the portion of the Quran that was added by the Ayatollah Khomeini to be taught. And for that reason, the radicals had put a kill fatwa out on him that lasted more than 20 years. So the things you heard about Libya were just not true. It was a progressive country. From the time we first went in there in 2007 until 2011, it was growing like crazy, and it was developing. It was a real clean place. Yeah, every religion was allowed to function in Libya as long as it was based on a book. And, you know, the thing that we saw, that they did have political problems in Libya, but it was mainly from Misrata. And Misrata were Turks that moved to Libya 150 or so years ago. Supposedly they converted to Islam. They were the mafia. They were the hard guys. They were the ones that beat up the Libyans and threatened them and everything. The Libyans are the most non-confrontational people I've ever met in my entire life. And so they fell prey to the Misrata mafia, the Turks, and 60% of all the contracts that the government of Libya were let without bid or tender to the Misrata mafia. They would then subcontract those to foreign building companies, construction companies. They would cheat them out of payments. They'd short them on payments. And then the companies would abandon the project, leaving, you know, tens of millions of dollars owing them. And then the Misrata mafia would turn around and lease it or let it into another company. And they were really bad guys. In fact, they had a building, a very nice building, about 10 stories tall, that was about 3 or 4 miles west of Tripoli. And when we drive by it, our Libyan friends would say, well, I asked what that building was. They said, that's Alibaba's building. And I'm thinking, Alibaba, I didn't find any company called Alibaba. And after 3 or 4 times of telling them, I said, what Alibaba? And they said, well, you know the old story about Alibaba and the 43 thieves? Well, that's the Turkish mafia. That's where they have their offices here in Tripoli. So, yes, they did have political problems, but those were not caused by Gaddafi. And the thing that we saw, we do our magic in our laboratory and in our production company. We let a local oil field service company do the in-field work, and we let them handle all the politics and all that, and we build a custom product for them to address whatever it is, a diesel spill, oil well cleanup, whatever. And we did not find a good partner in the first 2 years just because that society is so different and foreign to us. So JoAnne and I went to build a production plant in the Houston area. We were about 85 to 90% finished with that plant. When Hurricane Ike came in, that plant ended up in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. So JoAnne said, we need to go back to Libya and find our partners there and build the plant in Libya. And we did that. We went to Libya a total of 17 times. We were there never less than 30 days at a time. We traveled all over Libya. Several times we were there 3 months at a time. And, you know, we learned about the people of Libya and began to know their tribal culture, and we respected them for that. And so in the end, we signed about $5 billion worth of contracts. We moved in all of our feedstock and materials to build a huge plant in Libya. We did that, ordered that up the first week in January 2011. And then I left there on the 8th of February 2011. The 17th, the fighting started. And the fighting was a false flag operation, like everything the United States has done, I guess, for the last 100 or more years. The reasons that Libya had to be blown up were, first, was the African bank. And Gaddafi did not like the Federal Reserve System. He did not like the Rothschild bankers. And so he was an African Union guy. He went to form a gold-backed currency for the continent of Africa. The bank was called the African Bank. All the Arab countries had signed up as members, and half of Africa had signed up as members. And of course, with all the natural resources of Africa, the toilet paper bankers, the Federal Reserve, Euroclear, the Rothschild Group, would be out of business overnight if the people had a choice between a gold-backed currency backed by the continent of Africa or toilet paper like we have here. And so for that reason, the bankers who really run Washington, D.C., wanted him killed and out of business. The second thing was the United States is bound and determined to have a war with China. And they wanted to keep China away from the natural resources of Africa. So the United States was forming AFRICOM. And that's military control of Africa by the United States. Libya would not sign up. South Africa would not sign up. And 6 other countries wouldn't sign up. So the United States wanted to kill him so that they could affect AFRICOM. The third thing was Gaddafi had looked at all the broken treaties that the European countries had made when they invaded Africa for the last 200 years, and they imperialized everything. They broke all the treaties. They never paid what they were supposed to. The French still controlled the banking in several countries. Just terrible abuses to the treaties. And so Gaddafi brought a class action suit on behalf of the African Union against all the imperialist countries, and he included the United States over the Lockerbie mess, because as you all well know, your audience I know, knows that Libya had nothing to do with Lockerbie. This lawsuit was totaled $7 trillion. It was presented in international court, and the attorney said that lawsuit had legs, or it had a possibility of winning. Now, the Europeans could not afford that at all. They can't. They're all bankrupt. They can't afford to pay attention. So, of course, they could not be subjected to any kind of payments like that. So they joined hands to go against Libya. And those are really the 3 reasons why Libya had to be blown up. And, there was under the UN Charter, anybody that joins the UN, if there's some kind of a conflict in that country, the UN is required to have 3 fact-finding commissions that go into the country before they take military action. There was no fact-finding commission ever taken into Libya until they asked my wife and myself to go back in May, and we were asked to head an NGO fact-finding commission. The sponsoring group was the World Youth Organization. It's a peace organization, more than 2 billion members. JoAnne and I agreed to go back in there. We were promised unrestricted access to any part of Libya where we could verify all the details ourselves. And so we went back.
I'm sorry, James. And this is an arm of the United Nations? This is one of the groups
No. This is an independent, non-governmental organization, not part of the UN, not part of anything to do with the UN.
Right. Okay. But they're asking you to fulfill the one of these 3 trips that are required by the United Nations.
No, not at all. No.
I'm sorry.
No.
If you could clarify that for us, I'd appreciate it.
There was no relation to the United Nations, NATO, or anybody. This was a peace organization. The Youth Peace Organization has nothing to do with the United Nations or NATO.
They wanted a fact
and they wanted a fact-finding commission in there to clarify, because the stories coming out of Libya, if you heard the paid-for media, it was one thing. He was killing his people. And then you hear from inside the Libyans, and it was a completely different story. So the world needed to know the truth. And so this organization asked us if we would go in there. We did. We went in there in the first week in May, and we actually were trapped inside Tripoli until the 24th of August. when the destruction of Tripoli was completed by NATO, and JoAnne and I were captured by Al-Qaeda. We were taken to their torture center. We were sentenced to be killed and chopped up and burned. And God got us out of there with 3 miracles. And, that's a harrowing story. Each miracle was performed at God's help by a member of Al-Qaeda or Muslim Brotherhood. And, we had no help from the United States while we were in there. The Catholic Church, the Pope asked us to bring in a shipload of medical supplies. They knew my banking background, so I set up 2 corporations so that the medicine could be transferred into a Red Cross entity in Europe and then transferred to a Red Crescent entity in Malta. And the Pope was insistent that those medicine and medical supplies go to Tripoli, not Benghazi. And they could be whatever medicine, medical supplies the Libyans needed. And it took us a long time to get that set up. And that's really why we stayed in Tripoli longer than we could. But, the world knew that it was a false flag, or a lot of them.
During the time we were there, we were trapped because we couldn't get the road going out to Tunisia, where you could get a flight out of Libya, was being fought on and bombed on all the time. You never knew when a day was clear, when it wasn't. There were some reporters that got caught on that road and captured by Al-Qaeda, and no one knows what happened to them. So it was very dangerous. While we were in Tripoli, we interviewed a number of people. We were asked by the people of Libya to interview them because none of the news media was telling the truth. We went to a great number of Libyan tribal meetings. We got to know the Libyan people, and we came out of Libya with 200 gigabytes of proof of the atrocities. There were 60,000 bombing raids over Libya by NATO. They used depleted uranium cluster bombs, and they used fuel air explosives, which are the poor man's nuclear bomb. They bombed power plants, hospitals, hotels, schools, water treatment plants, people's houses. It goes on and on. Date farms. I mean, this is it every single day over Tripoli, there was no fighting in Tripoli. All war crimes. And they embargoed
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No problem. They embargoed the city of Tripoli. No one talks about this, but it was being embargoed by NATO. There were 2 million people in that city, and they kept fuel and water and medicine and food away from that city.
Now, understand this. All the military vehicles were diesel. All the civilian vehicles were gasoline. The UN and NATO embargoed gasoline from the western side of Libya. So these were war crimes. These were
against civilians.
Against civilians, and this auspices of the U.S. stepping in to blow the country up was to protect civilians. And instead of protecting civilians, 500 to 600,000 Libyans were murdered. And of that number, 200,000 or more were black, and in the first days of this phony revolution, the Al-Qaeda leaders stood up and said they were going to cleanse Libya of all the blacks who were nothing but mercenaries for Gaddafi. Now, let me tell you something about Libya. That country was colorblind. 35% of all the Libyan citizens were black, and they held first-class status and passports accordingly. In every single family there, you saw black, brown, beige, everything, in every family. So this mess about the U.S.-sponsored Al-Qaeda trying to commit genocide in Libya is an atrocity that should be written up and should have been supported by every black leader in this country, and none of them will talk about it except Cynthia McKinney. And not only that, but there's still 128 mass graves in Libya filled with black bodies that no one wants to go and look at, no one wants to identify. And this is a travesty that the black people in the United States should absolutely be in arms about. That we have this president, and they said, oh, you just hate him because he's a black man. No, I hate the white part of that guy, because there's never any case for a genocide to be committed, and especially in a country like Libya. The blacks were the most productive agricultural group in Libya. The chickens, the eggs, milk, grain crops and stuff, they were the number one producers of all those commodities.
Since the end of the war, 5 cities that were black have been razed. There are hundreds of thousands of homeless people in Libya now. Million homeless people in Libya now. 2 million.
JoAnne, James. Well, for the benefit of our listeners who aren't, some may not be too familiar with what went on a few years ago in 2011 and Al-Qaeda and Libya and all that. If we could just back up a little bit, and you did a wonderful representation of what life was like there in Libya under the leadership of Muammar Gaddafi. And he came to power in 1969, and there were sanctions on Libya. What was it, up until 2003 when he signed this agreement that lifted the sanctions? Okay, 2006. Yeah. But prior to that, Libya for years was under economic sanctions because they were doing for themselves. They had tremendous natural resources with very good oil, is my understanding. That doesn't take a lot of money to process and get out of the ground. You would know more about that than I. And it sounds like the natural resources were actually being shared with the people who they belonged to for a change. And that they did have a national bank, a public central bank that was not tied in with the Federal Reserve and the IMF and the other vultures that rape every country on the planet. So evidently this agreement that Gaddafi signed to lift the sanctions, that allowed for Western business to come in, and that's, the time frame sounds about right when you were saying that things were really starting to rock and roll on ground economically there with the oil business and all, and that's about what time you folks came in. Is it not? That's in the latter part of the 2000s?
You couldn't travel you couldn't travel into Libya unless you were a foreign entity. The United States, any citizen couldn't go in there. So the treaty was signed in 2006. We were the first non-government entity to go in there. But the plan of the United States was to send nothing but intelligence agencies in there, posing as companies, to take over Libya. The plan to overthrow Gaddafi had been in the works a long time, because when he threw the oil companies out, it was because they were overcharging for the service they were doing in the fields. They had sludge pits all over. Their sludge pits that are 5 and 6 and 7 miles long and a couple of miles wide. You can see them from satellites, and Gaddafi called them the scar in the desert. Those should have been cleaned up by the companies. They didn't. So there was a real complaint about the bad stewardship of the oil producers in Libya. And so Gaddafi told them, clean it up or else. He also nationalized the oil companies like they did in Saudi Arabia and every place else. But the difference was he was participating the money out with the people of Libya. And that, of course, doesn't fit the one world order people, because you've got to look at the government that they're running, not somebody else. People didn't have that.
You can't have the people doing for themselves and not dependent on the central government. That is definitely a no-no. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but Larry and I had a guest on a few months back, and you may have been on his program or may know of him, Michael Rivero of WhatReallyHappened.com. And he did a video earlier in the year or last year entitled "All Wars Are Bankers' Wars." And he was highlighting, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, right after 9/11 here, the 9/11-01 in the U.S., General Wesley Clark was told by his contacts in the Pentagon that there was a plan to take out 7 countries. Was it 7, Larry? 7 countries in 5 years, and Libya like being that. One of them. And it's the same play that you guys have been describing. You have the leader, and you send in mercenaries or agent provocateurs, and you call them freedom fighters or rebels, and they're saying the government is bad for the people. Somebody fires a few shots, and all of a sudden the leader that the U.S. wants to get rid of is killing his own people is the play. And, we saw this in Syria. We saw it in Libya. You mentioned
we saw it
in Iraq.
Yeah,
Iraq.
Now,
with
let me give you some
Saddam Hussein. But please,
yeah.
I do want to bring Larry into the conversation because I know that he's probably got a bunch of questions for you after viewing your tapes. I want to focus more on how the U.S. Was part of this overthrow because that's our responsibility, James, is what our government does in our name, and that's a big part of our radio program that Larry and I do. Is to keep an eye on our own government, show where it's wrong, show where we should be taking action, and if there's people that are impeding our way, and there's plenty of that on both the left and right, we call them gatekeepers and provocateurs and what have you, modern day COINTELPRO, we want to root that out as well. So we're going to try to do that in the program tonight and leave our listeners with a course of action to take, hopefully, after they listen to the program. And we're very, very thankful to have you on to give this on-the-ground account of what the U.S. Involvement was in this totally illegal overthrow of another sovereign nation.
My question is to James and to JoAnne. The listeners are wondering what your motivation was initially. I'm talking about prior to 2007. What motivated you, just if you don't mind sharing this, to go to Libya? And your description of Libya was absolutely very graphic and deeply appreciated. But what were your motives? I'm talking about even prior to 2007 when you all were actually there. If you don't mind sharing that.
Sure. We control our product by production. And we've been doing a lot of business in China. We couldn't get them to pay us properly. We were looking for new business. And JoAnne and myself are the marketing team for our company. And we had a new project in Kuwait that was about $150 million worth of our business. It was to clean up naturally occurring radioactive material. It's not a fun business. It's exotic, but it's not fun. And so we thought we'd stop off in Libya because Libya had now signed the treaty and they had not had any new technology in Libya in 38 years. Their oil production had been 3.7 million barrels of oil a day. Before the restrictions, it was down to about 1 million barrels of oil a day. So that kind of numbers has our name all over it. We rejuvenate oil wells. We bring them back up to initial production rates. So it was a really excellent business opportunity if the country wasn't so crazy that we couldn't do business there. So we went there with a big question mark. But it was driven based on our idea that we were looking for a new market and improve our position over what we were doing in China. Now, the thing that I want everybody to know about Libya is that in 2011, now this had been building up for years, but Libya had $241 billion in cash and cash equivalents in the Fed. Here in the United States, they had 150 billion euros in Euroclear. They had $39 billion in cash in the country in February of 2011. They had 179 tons of gold. They had 2,000 tons of silver. They had lots and lots of tons of all the other heavy earths, rare earths, precious metals, etc. All that's disappeared. Al-Qaeda now owns that country, and they've got more than $100 billion, and they've got the income from the oil coming out. So was this a banker's war? Absolutely. And all the money that was in Libya has disappeared. The first thing the Federal Reserve did was recognize a phony central bank that was set up the fourth day of the fighting and they received $1 billion from Saudi Arabia to pay all the mercenaries. First time in the history of the world that a central bank was set up by a bunch of rebel rousers. Now, let's look at what happened in Syria. They were trying to attach all the accounts of Syria. In the Ukraine, the first week of fighting in the Ukraine, all the gold of the Ukraine was flown into the Federal Reserve in New York City. Now, how can these things happen and not anybody look at it cross-eyed and nobody reports it? Larry, you know you're one of the best at really digging in and finding the truth. And these things are just not being reported. But, you know, we're talking about more than $500 billion in cash. That's disappeared. 179 tons of gold, 2,000 tons of silver, all gone. And the Libyan people are starving. The country is in disarray. It's a failed state. 25% of all the babies born in Libya now are so deformed they don't live 24 hours. There was no deformities in the old days. Libya was number 4 in the world. Because of
depleted uranium.
Depleted uranium.
That's it.
Yes.
Here's a country that's blown up. It glows like a Chinese lantern from all the depleted uranium, and the U.S. is the one that made those munitions. Something else that you all should be really upset about is JoAnne and I were in Brega. That's a big oil port in Libya. A C-130 landed full of Marines. It was hit with a rocket as soon as it landed. Everybody in it was killed and burned to the ground. And Obama was saying there was never any troops on the ground in Libya. We saw them. We've got video proof of it. This is why the agencies here in the United States are trying to kill us, because we have proof that it's only good for our citizens here in the United States. The rest of the world knows how nasty the United States is. And so we've been...
It's not the people.
It's not the people, it's the government. And,
yes.
You know, these are things, after the top of the hour, we'll tell you about everything we know about Benghazi. We know everything about Benghazi. We know the 3 coordinators for the attacks. We know them. We have their name, addresses, and phone numbers because their family ratted them out. And they were ashamed of what they did. We know the head of Ansar al-Sharia.
And we know this because we are the official spokespersons for the tribes of Libya. The 2 million in exile contacted us and asked us to please speak for them because they don't trust anybody else. And because they have information to pass. They needed to pass it. They want to clean their country of al-Qaeda.
You see, when we went to Libya, we learned how to do business the way the Libyans do it. We learned how to respect them as human beings. We respected their culture. We didn't lie to them. They didn't lie to us. And we forged a relationship that endures to this day. And our hearts are broken for what our country did to their country.
Yes, and as far as that, I saw on your website that page where Who Are James and JoAnne Moriarty, Our Story. There's a copy of that document on the tribes of Libya, or from the tribes of Libya, signing off that you folks should be treated as their spokespeople. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes.
That's correct.
Yes, so I encourage folks to go to your website, LibyanWarTheTruth.com. And so it sounds like the motivation that the Moriartys had to go to Libya was that the markets opened up after the sanctions were lifted, and it seemed like a good business opportunity where their product was something that could be useful there, and they all could make out, and then we had this overthrow.
Joe, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, so I want the listeners to be perfectly clear that I am with this question playing devil's advocate. Now, JoAnne and James, why, I thought, or we're told at least, that the United States government, supposedly our government, opposes al-Qaeda. Why, it seems that you're saying that they don't. Could you enlighten us on that? Question mark, exclamation point.
Yeah, we can. Listen, when I got back from Libya was the 8th of February of 2011. The 17th, they started blowing up the country, and this peaceful revolution began by the rebels who were al-Qaeda, stealing cars, converting them into firebombs. They firebombed the police stations, and then went in there and got the guns, and then went and attacked the military bases. and took the tanks and turned them on the soldiers and started blowing the country up. So it was never a peaceful revolution. But we've got our friends and our tribal guys are calling us every day, and they're saying, you know, these are real hard guys, and you've got to tell your government that you're supporting the bad guys. So we called every politician in Washington, D.C. JoAnne was spending 8 hours a day telling about how wrong-footed we were in the war in Libya, and how they needed to stop supporting these Al-Qaeda and these bad guys. And JoAnne was spending 8 hours a day every day. And we never could get through the firewalls. Finally, she learned how to do that. Talking to all the congressmen, politicians, nobody would speak to us. We talked to the Texas politicians, the Oklahoma politicians, the New York politicians, all of them. And in the end, nobody would ever call us back. We never got any response. One person called us back. That's right, and that was Dennis Kucinich. And Dennis Kucinich put forward 8 pieces of legislature to try to take the United States out of the war in Libya, to defund it, everything else. And he was rewarded by being redistricted out of office. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the part about Al-Qaeda is we thought they were the enemy. We kept telling everybody how wrong-footed we were. And finally, after 9/11, when Chris Stevens was killed, we then, Dr. Jerome Corsi of WorldNet Daily started receiving our information, and he's written 25 to 30 articles on information we provided him. A lot of the information that the tribes have passed through to us have been read in the congressional records, including the fact that Morsi, the president of Egypt, is head of Ansar al-Sharia. He financed and helped train the attack on Benghazi, which killed Chris Stevens. And then in March of 2013, the intelligence agencies began to come into our home at our invitation to find out what we knew in Libya, because their junkyard dogs, Al-Qaeda, had turned on them. And this included Defense Intelligence Agency, the FBI Task Force Against Terrorism, another FBI group that supposedly did wed work, and finally the CIA.
Came in with a blaze.
And the CIA came in with a blaze, Glenn Beck's production company, and they were going to do a documentary on us. But in the meantime, we're giving them, they wanted all this information we were getting out of Libya, and since we're in contact with the tribal leaders every day, we would give them latitude and longitude where Al-Qaeda had their training camps, where the leaders of Al-Qaeda spent the night, where Al-Qaeda was digging underground storage facilities for weapons, what trucks they were traveling in, etc. Gave them all this information, and we asked them, were they going to help the Libyans get rid of Al-Qaeda? And these intelligence agencies told us that all the information we provided them was being passed up to the top of the government of the United States and was being discarded. And then they said, you know, the agenda in the United States is being set by Muslim Brotherhood. Well, that didn't sound good. And then in one instance, we gave them the very secret training camp that Al-Qaeda had in the Derna area, where there were 1,300 hardcore Al-Qaeda, and they were bringing in Al-Qaeda members from all over the world into that camp, training them, and then sending them back out. A lot of them to the United States. And when we tried to tell the intelligence agencies, they said, oh, you can't say that because there's only 75 Al-Qaeda in the entire world. And they said, you'll have to use some other term like radical Islamist or something if you want to be believed. So, you know, if it walks like Al-Qaeda and chops off heads like Al-Qaeda, it's got to be Al-Qaeda in our estimation.
Yeah, and Larry, there's a piece of hard evidence that Dr. Corsi, we brought forward to Dr. Corsi, is right after Morsi was thrown out in Egypt, they found documents in his desk and other things. One of the documents they found was passed to us, and it is a document from the U.S. Embassy where Muslim Brotherhood leaders, they all had to sign for the money. Their names and their signatures are on this document, and the amount of money they were given at the U.S. Embassy. Anywhere from $500,000 to $800,000, they would go to the U.S. Embassy and collect this money. These are all the worst leaders of Muslim Brotherhood. Those men are now on trial in Egypt for being spies with the United States.
You know, we have many, many documents to prove it, but, I mean, the fact that the CIA has always trained Al-Qaeda, we never really believed that. Now we believe it. The fact that MI6 developed Muslim Brotherhood, we didn't believe that. We now know that's true. But the thing that's hard for us to understand is how and why would our government do that. But I'm gonna give you some information that should scare you, and I'm fearless and I'm scared about it. Al-Qaeda has taken over the passport office in Libya in October of 2011. We verified that from a friend that's a sympathizer for the rebels in Libya and also from the tribal leaders. And this man, who's the brother of al-Libi, Wahad Gaib is this guy's name, he's on the passport office, and they bring in radicals from all over the world. They bring them to Libya, and if their English is good enough, they give them a new Libyan name, a new Libyan passport. They set up a bank account in the United States with $4 million in it. They receive a permanent green card, multiple entry visa. 300 to 3,000 a month of those guys have been coming into the United States from Libya every month since October 2011. And when we gave this information to the intelligence agencies, they said, gosh, what should we do about that? And I said, it ought to be real easy. Look at any Libyan that's come to the United States since October of 2011, and if they've got $4 million in a bank account, then waterboard the bastard until he tells you who he works for. They said, we can't do that because that would be profiling. So they know these people are coming in here. We've also found out from Syria, because we have been passing information about what happens in Syria to them, and they said that there's 30,000 al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda in Syria, have been shipped to the United States in private jets, and that the pilots had to sign a 29-page non-disclosure document, and when those people arrived in the United States, they were given money and a U.S. passport. They didn't go through a customs office. So, I've got more stories like that I can tell you. So how did we become disenchanted with our government when we learned that they are not only supporting al-Qaeda, they're training them, equipping them with weapons? And Chris Stevens' job, before he became ambassador, he was the weapons dealer to al-Qaeda. Weapons came from the United States into Qatar. They were shipped from Qatar into Benghazi and given to al-Qaeda by Chris Stevens. So, our information is firsthand, and we have visual proof of it. We've got photos of U.S. weapons in crates that were shipped in and confiscated by the Libyan military.
One of the things that the U.S. Intelligence agencies is really upset with us about is that we name the names of the agents that came into our home. The ones that threatened our lives, we name all of them. And they called us about a month ago and said, we had a meeting about the Moriartys, and we decided you guys are the worst of the worst because you're putting out our names. And now I have to sleep with a gun because I never had to do that, and now the bad guys know who I am. And I said, you signed on for that job. I didn't. And to come into my home and threaten me, I don't see any reason I should keep their name secret because first of all, they gave me a phony name. We found out their real names by accident. But
let me tell you what this Nikki Bear calls. She's CIA. She came in with a blaze. And they were going to do a 2-hour documentary. They interviewed us all one day. They were going to come back 3 days later with their film crew. And when we hadn't heard from them the evening before, JoAnne called these 3 Blaze people, and the person that called back was Nikki Barracall. And she said, I've killed the project because you all have been talking to intelligence agencies. You need to continue doing that. She said, in addition to that, you have to stop. You have to forget about Libya. And you need to start your life over today, or you won't have a life. And I said, that sounds like a threat. She raised her voice and she said, you stand down and do exactly what I'm telling you. If you don't do what I'm telling you, you will not have a life. So when we hung up, I said, JoAnne, our lives have been threatened by the CIA. We have to start going public. Prior to that time, we had kept believing that we would find a good, God-fearing politician somewhere in this country, and when they heard that we were wrong-footed in supporting al-Qaeda, our common enemy, that they do something about it, and they didn't. And that woman also verified to us, while she was in our home, that we had been blacklisted and soft-killed by the intelligence agencies here. And she said, you should be happy they didn't do a terminal kill. And I said, well, first of all, what's a soft kill? She said, that's when they kill you financially. They stop your business. They alienate you from all your business associates. They isolate you from your family, and they ruin you. or you have no ability to affect the government. So they have been 100% successful in doing a soft kill. And I said, well, what's a hard kill? And she said, that's where you disappear and you end up in a FEMA camp or a Homeland Security camp. Nobody ever hears from you again. So our government has attacked us, my dear wife, innocent of any kind of wrongdoing ever, and they have threatened us, and they have isolated us, and they've made us bankrupt. We used to have 3 homes. We're now homeless. And they've done this to us because we have proof of the war crimes and the atrocities that were committed in Libya.
And we're eyewitnesses. That's the worst part. There was not supposed to be any Americans other than the CIA, CNN lady that was over there and those people.
We have pictures of CIA right there hand in hand with Al-Qaeda training them. We also have pictures of John McCain holding hands with arms around the shoulders of Al-Qaeda, and he said, these are my brothers.
These are my heroes.
These are my heroes. And then in Syria, he said, these are my brothers. So, you know, the proof is out there if anybody wants to look for it.
Now, the woman that actually came back and talked to us was Michelle Bachmann's aide. Her name is Tara Dahl. She's the one they're really upset that we're putting her name out. They said, you shouldn't put Tara Dahl's name out.
Also, Michelle Bachmann.
They're not supposed to mention her name either. But Tara Dahl told us that everybody in Washington, D.C. knows the truth about Libya, that we were supporting Al-Qaeda. She says, that's no secret. Everybody knows it. So that was going during the war. She's the one who introduced us to the start of the intelligence agencies, and then they started introducing us to other intelligence agencies, and they said we should have been debriefed. We were captured by Al-Qaeda. Nobody gets back without being debriefed. A whole bunch of stuff happened. But she is the one who introduced us to the Blaze, who then turned around and brought the CIA into our homes.
Now, they gave us the intelligence agencies gave us a test to find out if we really had contact with the tribes, because they said nobody has ever been able to get inside the tribes and get their confidence. So they asked us for the names and locations of all the tribe leaders in Libya. And they said, you got a couple weeks to do it. And JoAnne called the head of all the tribes, Sheikh Ali, and they stayed all night in a meeting, and we had the information for them the next morning. We called this Eric Maddox, and JoAnne said, I have all the information for you. He was shocked. He came to our home. He got that. They also sent us a map of Libya with where the tribes were located, where their homelands were, etc. And when he sent it to his handlers in Washington, D.C., he called us back and he said they are blown away. They have never found anybody that had any contact with tribes anywhere in the world like we had, and that they were amazed how we could, the two people could sit in Woodlands, Texas, and with a phone call get intelligence on what was happening in anywhere in North Africa. But instead of helping us, they ruined us. They soft-killed us. And then the latest they've done to us is they planted drugs in our car last Friday, and God again helped us and saved us, because someone took the drugs out, I don't know who it was, before they stopped us for a bogus speeding ticket, a 67 and a 65. And there were two cars that stopped us, a drug dog and another car. And they looked in our car while they were on the cell phone. They were searching one section of the car for 2.5 hours while they had us stand on the side of the road. When their dog didn't sniff anything, the handler of the dog kept putting his hand up on the back window of our SUV, and the dog would jump up there and back down, and after about 15 or 20 times, he said, well, the dog has marked drugs here. And I said, no, I think that's some venison. Some new friends gave us a bunch of venison because they didn't eat it. We would love to have it. And he said, no, this dog only finds hard drugs. And they went back there and had me intertwine my fingers behind my head and arrested me because they were fixing to find some drugs. And, of course, 2 or 2.5 hours later, no drugs. And they said, well, there's been drugs in here recently. And I said, not a chance, because I can promise you. And the trouble JoAnne and I are in, we don't speed. We don't do drugs. We have done drugs. He said, what prescription medicines do you take? I said, we don't take any. We can't afford that anymore.
Yeah. It sounds like the par for the course, huh, Larry, as far as being hassled. And for those who don't know, it sounds like the structure of government in Libya is basically all these different tribes, And what I want to ask you, James and JoAnne, after Gaddafi was overthrown and the government that they did have there was just overthrown and torn apart, it sounds like there's just lawlessness there, and the criminal elements rise to the top, and they pretty much run things, and it sounds like there's just the Wild West and a bunch of gangs, and if anyone wants to run guns through Libya like they were doing in Benghazi and running them into Syria and all these other places, it's wide open for that, is it not?
That's correct. Before NATO blew the country up, Libya had a two-part government. They had an elected group that was called the People's Congress, and then the heads of all the tribes elected other tribal leaders, and they had the General Secretariat, which was a 200-member tribal group. And so there were really two parts to their government, and that functioned very well, you know. But after the country was blown up, of course, one reason we believe that they finally invaded Tripoli like they did is because the tribes on the 5th of May, 2011, voted 100% to establish a new constitution for the country that every Libyan could vote on. And that was finished on the 17th of August and delivered to Sheikh Ali Al-Ahwal. We were sitting with him when it was delivered, and he held it up and he said, "Here's the Constitution. We're now going to put it out for a vote." And so the attack on Tripoli, which had no fighting inside Tripoli to speak of, began immediately thereafter. And on one night, on the 21st, I think, after they had nonstop bombing of Tripoli forever, JoAnne and I went on the 21st floor of our hotel late in the afternoon, and two Apache gunships came in, flying low from the Mediterranean with their guns blaring. A third one we could hear but couldn't see, and they were shooting every man, woman, and child in the street. They killed more than 1,300 people and wounded 5,000 in the first hour of the attack on Tripoli.
And who was it that these planes were from? Were these U.S. planes, NATO, French?
They're helicopters. They're Apache helicopters made in the United States. And we don't know who was flying them, but they were killing every man, woman, child in the street. They were from NATO.
Yes.
And there were 11 warships in the Mediterranean to affect the no-fly zone, to protect the innocent civilians. And I don't know how many people were killed when Tripoli was attacked, but I can tell you the total number of Libyan citizens killed, out of 5.5 million, 500,000, maybe as many as 600,000. There are now so many people in prisons in Libya. There in Misrata, there are 32,000 rotting bodies inside that prison. They don't carry them out because they don't want they've been tortured to death. They don't want anybody to know how many there are in there. There are 128 mass graves in Libya, mostly filled with black people. 2 million in exile, 1 million living homeless, 2 million in fear of their lives. There's total anarchy. The mobs rule the street, and the mobs are Al-Qaeda. They call themselves militia, but that's a name the CIA gave them to legitimatize them. They're not militia. They're murdering psychopaths. And they now have in the recent weeks, they've captured another 1,000 young Libyan women, and they take them into prison, so they have rape houses. And there are incidents of AIDS now all over Libya, typhoid, hepatitis. None of the trash is getting hauled off. There's rotten bodies all over the place. You know, the place is a ruined state. Thank you very much. UN and NATO directed by the United States.
And when the tribes are working to take their country back, when they learned that the resistance is huge against this failed state, CIA has gone in there and made, I don't know how many, what they call
20 or more.
Campuses, they call them, but what they are is Al-Qaeda camps around any area like Ben Walid, where the people have never been joined any of this revolution stuff. And Al-Qaeda, they're funding and arming them through Qatar and Turkey. We just got today a notice that there's an Algerian head, his name's Mukhtar bin Mukhtar, something like that.
Bad guy.
He's wanted by the U.S. on the top 10 list. He's taken root in Sirte, and they are going to declare Sirte an Islamic Sharia emirate, whatever They have Abdul Hakim Belhaj, who was in Guantanamo, and his buddy Sufyan Gamo, who was bin Laden's driver, and Wahab Gaid. They're all running Tripoli now. Tripoli is a complete mess. All of Al-Qaeda makes home now in Tripoli. There are people there can't even come out of their houses.
Tripoli, I mean, on the east side of Tripoli was the old U.S. military base called Matiga. And every night, 1 or 2 planes flies in there after dark from Qatar, bring in weapons and more Al-Qaeda from all over the world, and they're being trained in Libya. And there were 20,000 man-pad rockets delivered into Libya after the no-fly zone was established. Now, why would we have done that? Why would we have given 20,000 shoulder-mounted rockets that knocked down airplanes, some of the best in the world, delivered them to Al-Qaeda after the no-fly zone was established?
Well, that's a great question right there. That's a great question. Let's take a look at this now, and let's examine who and how is benefiting from the situation after blowing the country up. Now, it sounds like, we do know our government, when it wants to overthrow another country that's not playing ball with the bankers or has some resources that it's sharing with others that should be with them, according to the way they're thinking. What they do is they have these Al-Qaeda or whatever, the troublemakers that destabilize the country, like they did there in Libya and Syria and elsewhere, Ukraine, where else? Even in Iraq and all that, they special ops would fire on the mosques, and the British SAS had the beards, and this is how they do. So let's look at Libya post getting blown up, and again, this is all on the U.S. taxpayers' dime also, by the way, and also in the name of every U.S. citizen, whether they like it or not. So we've got plenty of training grounds, everything for destabilization actions wherever they're needed. It sounds like they've got a great bullpen there to call on, and whenever they want to overthrow another government.
Your phraseology is perfect, because we got to know the Ambassador Dangor from South Africa. He was in our hotel because his security team left. And so we were asking him, why in the world did South Africa join hands to fight Libya when they were always so close? And he said, we didn't have any choice, because the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, came into our country and told us if we did not join hands in the fight against Libya, that we would have rebels in our own country. He said it's like the woman had a closet full of rebels she could drop down any place. And the same thing was told by our very, very close friends in Kuwait, that Hillary Clinton threatened them if they didn't join hands, that they would have rebels. So it's been a bully, blackmail is the reason they get these combine of countries to join hands with them. But it's a sad state of affairs, and the thing that all of us have to realize is that the attacks on these other countries are attacks on us as well. Because JoAnne and I were very substantial people. We're good, God-fearing people. We did lots of humanitarian activities. But they came after us, they attacked us, and they have ruined us. And so anybody that does not agree with them will be looking at the same trouble we're in.
Mm-hmm. Hello, caller. Name and where you're calling from.
Yeah, it's Cirillo from Kissimmee.
Oh, hello, Chris. This is Chris Cirillo from Kissimmee, Florida, here in Central Florida. Do you have a question for the Moriartys, Chris?
Yeah, I was just caught in on the back end of the show, and I didn't realize how bad the situation is in Libya. All the deaths. This is something new. You don't hear it from the mainstream media. Where is the confirmation on that information to show the validity of it? The gentleman that was talking about all the deaths, where is he getting his information from, Phil?
Well, it's all a part of public records, and you can dig into it and find it. But let me recommend something else. We had an hour and a half meeting with Pete Sessions. He's the head of the Rules Committee in Congress. He's about the fifth most powerful guy in Washington, D.C. He validated everything we've ever said with Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C. They confirmed that we've been blacklisted, soft-killed. He verified all the information. And you can call his office, his chief of staff is Lee Padilla, and you can verify all that information. But as far as the amount of gold and the silver and all that, that's part of public record. The amount of money that was in the Federal Reserve and Euroclear, that's also part of public record. And the amount of money that's in Libya was also part of public record. The thing you're not going to find is what happened to all of it. It all disappeared. Libya was a very, very wealthy country, and they spent 49% of their income on the country, on the running the country. The rest of it was spent to help the people of Libya.
Phil, I'd like to give a couple of websites, too.
Not
good. Only ours is a good one because we get information from the tribes every day. But Voltaire Network, Voltaire, Voltaire Network, like the French painter, is run by a man named Terry Mason, and he was actually in Libya with us. He's a very famous writer, journalist, and author from France. He lives in Lebanon. There's a bunch of authors on that site, on Voltaire Network. They do great stuff about Syria, Libya, Egypt, and everything. And also, there's a website called Libya Against the Superpower Media. That's a great one to go get information on. And, of course, Dr. Corsi puts out a lot of our stuff, too. You can read about Libya, a lot of the articles he's put out through WorldNet Daily.
Are there any independent news media on the ground there, like Democracy Now! Or anything, or is it too dangerous to have anyone there?
Al-Qaeda has made it illegal over there.
You can't. They don't
everybody keeps on bringing up the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. It's an invention of the CIA. I think everybody, if stop bringing that up and just show that they're high-paid mercenaries of the intelligence agencies of the CIA, ISI, MI6, it's going to keep people on the straight path. You're confusing everyone. If you're telling there's no such thing as the Al-Qaeda and Taliban, I would just indicate they are high-paid mercenaries of the various intelligence agencies working for the New World Order.
It is we, the people, who are ultimately responsible for what's going on in our names. And it's also we, the people, who in the end are the only ones that are going to be able to do anything to change things. And we've got to get rid of this left-right divide. One of the things is the Benghazi. You know, you got all the people on the right with the Benghazi. How dare they let our guys, Obama lets our guys get killed, and then the left defends Obama. The real deal with Benghazi is we were running the damn weapons through there that supplied these bandits and hoodlums and mercenaries and the Al-Qaeda that were killing U.S. troops in Iraq for years and Afghanistan. And, it's all BS. And it's we the people that have got to use what's at our disposal to curb this, if not totally stop it. And that's why in the beginning of the program I mentioned the people's remedy of impeachment. And we still have this war criminal. We have a resolution that one of the national anti-war organizations passed, although the leadership won't let you know about it. And the people's remedy is a call for impeachment of the sitting war criminal president. And we can do that right now, right today. And we've got to just get behind this thing and make the call for it. Do our part. You know.
I just wanted to thank everybody for doing what they're doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We've got a lot of work ahead of us.
And I do want to mention that the Moriartys have a DVD on their website where they captured these presentations and the different documentation of the atrocities that they've witnessed. And I want to encourage the listeners to go to their website, LibyanWarTheTruth.com, and look for that DVD and purchase a couple of them if you can, and start getting it out to folks in your community. And also, this helps the Moriartys, keep food in their belly. They've been cleaned out. The business that they had to provide for themselves, that's all gone. These folks are living day by day, so you'd be helping them out as well. Larry, we're down to about 7 minutes in the program. Did you want to pick up where I was leaving off as far as action items and what we do with this information that the Moriartys have shared with us, and what can we do, what we're not doing enough? Why don't you take us from there, Larry?
Well, I just want to be very brief. The fact is that we need to intensify and re-intensify. In other words, what I'm saying is we cannot expect and should not expect the corporate stream media to tell any story but that of the corporate government. I mean, that's the way it is. We have to be the media ourselves. We have to connect with one another. We need to get past this damn fake, phony, left, right, left paradigm. We have to get past that. We have to start communicating directly with one another. Damn the so-called leadership. We are the leadership. The leadership that we have is, when I say we now, the leadership that's been put upon us is misleadership. It's not leadership. We, the people, are the leadership. And we have to make this real. As far as an impeachment, obviously, that's something that has to be done. The sitting war criminal president, Barack Obama, must be dealt with using the remedy that we have, the constitutional remedy. Impeach him. Meanwhile, spread the word to our brothers and sisters throughout this nation. As I believe was said earlier in the program, this is affecting us. This has got to stop. If they'll do it in Libya, if they'll do it in Somalia, if they'll do it in Ukraine, what's to make you think that they won't do it and aren't doing it on a slightly lower level right here in the United States? So that's what I have to say. It's time for we the people to act like we the people. It's time for us to do what Thomas Jefferson said many, many years ago, and that was every generation needs a new revolution. It's time for our generation, 2014, to communicate with each other, work with each other, and no longer stand for this corporate stream vomit that passes for news because it's not news. That's all I have to say for the moment, at least. And as we said back in the day in the Black Panther Party, all power to the people. Black, white, brown, red, and yellow people. All power belongs to everyday, ordinary people, but only if we utilize it, if we do it. That's it, Bill.
Thank you, Larry.
God bless you. And you're very eloquent. That was perfect. And, the thing that has happened to us is this administration and the media has been so successful in separating all of us and trying to divide us. And we, the people, have got to start joining hands together in a common cause to bring our liberty back to us. And the things that Larry said are so eloquent, and we see ourselves being forced into boxes that we don't belong. The thing is, we all bleed the same color, and there's no reason for us to share our blood in vain.
Larry, you said something in one of the video YouTubes that we watch that we use all the time, that each one meet one, each one teach one. And we use that all the time.
Please do. Use it and get everybody else to use it. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's a great saying.
And speaking of that, JoAnne, we haven't mentioned this yet tonight, but you and James have been traveling the country giving your talks. And I imagine, is there a way that people can get in touch with you and invite you to their community
Sure.
to further this message? How would you suggest?
They can go to our website. You know, they can contact us through the website. We're ready to talk to anybody, any place. The only way we stand a chance of being alive is the more people that know about us, the more people are listening to our story.
We're trying to reach everyone. And
we need new friends. They've alienated us from all our old ones.
They can reach us at eyewitnesslibya@gmail.com, too. That's an email address they can reach us at.
eyewitnesslibya@gmail.com.
Yes.
Very good. And the website is LibyanWarTheTruth.com. And
Yes.
in addition to our listeners going to your website and trying to support you monetarily and getting copies of your DVDs to distribute, what way would you suggest that we, the American people, everyone listening, what do we have to do to remedy this thing? Not a generalization. What action items would you ask in addition to ourselves getting your story out? What do we need to do?
We have to bring religion back into our lives. You know, this country is in a terrible place. We have to get back on our knees. We have to bring religion back in. We have to protect our family units. We have to protect our kids. And we need to act like human beings. And that's something all of us can do. And we would like to keep you in our prayers, and we'd like to ask everyone to keep us in your prayers as well. And this is very important. That we're in a terrible place. Our country's in a terrible place, and we have every opportunity here to make it a better place.
And people need to be active, you know. It doesn't do any good anymore to say, well, I'll let my neighbor do it, because at some point they're going to come get you, and your neighbor won't be there to help you. You know, everybody needs to step up.
And Larry mentioned one of the founding fathers, you know, the quotes that we have to go back to and utilize. I don't know who gave this quote, but basically the gist of it was that if we're our foreign entanglements is what enables tyranny to grow here at home. You know, so this crap that's going on, you know, overseas, you know, that this same game plan we've been running for God knows how many years, you know, if you're not liking what's happening here at home, we got to deal with that.
That's true.
You know.
Well, it's the shield game. But thank you all so much for having us on. Thank you for your audience.
Thank you.
I cannot be silent.
Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. Everyone must play a part. Everyone got to go to work. Work for peace. Spirit said work.
I cannot be silent.